In our editorial of today, we start by going through the definition of diplomacy as we look at Diplomacy Masterclass Made Simple, Identifying and Choosing a Negotiator, the Swiss-led process or CDN2 Ottawa by Bridget Muyang Fielding. Simply defined, diplomacy is the art of dealing with people, groups, nations in a sensitive manner. It is more specifically about dealing with nations, solving interstate or international problems. Diplomacy seeks to solve problems without aggravating either belligerent party, especially the stronger aggressor, even when they are at fault. This makes diplomacy a very difficult art. Diplomacy is the only profession where doublespeak is unofficially approved. Diplomats are allowed to speak cautiously with water in their mouths. Now, sometimes declaring the opposite of what they actually mean. This definition is very much at variance with those Amazonians who have charted a straight course that the Amazonian crisis must follow to be solved. These individuals tend to refer themselves at every turn and twist to textbooks on the science, but make no headway each time. It is true that international treaties, accords, covenants, conventions, charters, international law lay down principles that guide the practice of diplomacy, but on the field, the practice itself is almost always at odds with laid down text. It may seem sometimes that the aggrieved party is being disregarded and that the international community does not want to do justice. But the said international community, by bilateral and multilateral interest, and more importantly, by the same laws it has put in place. Foremost amongst them, the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign nations. If diplomacy were practiced stricto sensu in respect of international law as though in schools of diplomacy, the present Amazonian crisis would never have happened. The 1995 Elat Foncha Muna UN delegation would have returned with statehood restored. Those who seek solutions to their problems through diplomatic channels should have a strong staying power, courage, patience, and endurance, failing which defeat will come before a diplomatic milieu is covered. Now, solving conflict, it is usually in the best interest of the aggrieved, the weaker, belligerent party to sue for a peaceful solution to the conflict at the earliest. In the case pitting La République du Cameroon versus Nigeria over the Bakassi Peninsula, it was Yaoundé, the weaker party, that petitioned the ICJ. She filed a suit in spite of the fact that she was the aggrieved party in a territory that did not belong to her. This is stated to make it abundantly clear that it was never wrong for Amazonia President Sako to have sought the services of a mediator in the Amazonian crisis as claimed by John Mba Akuro. Others even held that the struggle must take hold of the territory before suing for negotiations, allegedly to negotiate from a position of strength. Inasmuch as this sounds right, it speaks of a total misconception of what international negotiations is all about. Why will Amazonians or any other aggrieved party sue for negotiations after recovering what was forcefully taken from them? While getting a mediator, the choice of a mediator in a conflict like ours is not always so obvious. Some have opined that our best options lie in direct UN-brokered negotiations, but from experience, this is not usually the case. Many more Amazonians have expressed the desire to have the government of the United States play mediator in our matter. This group thinks that Yaoundé will scamper as soon as the US coughs. That too does not usually happen among sovereign nations, their sizes notwithstanding. More so, the US government always has positions and is hardly ever neutral on any situation around the world because her influence and interests are extensive. This accounts for why the US is hardly ever seen playing mediator in both the cases of the United States government and the United Nations. It is safe to state that they are indirectly in charge of any international mediation efforts that they endorse, observe, or take part in. Choosing a mediator is not always easy. If Ukraine, for instance, were to get a mediator for the ongoing crisis in the Balkans, you can be sure that it would not turn to America as the world put off the Russians. Ukraine is more likely to get Russia agreed to negotiate with Turkey as mediator. This is informed by Turkey's strident position in the conflict, her privileged diplomatic relations with Moscow, and the fact that both parties share common interest in the Middle East. Also, as member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, Turkey shares many interests with the Western backers of Ukraine. This is demonstrated by Ankara's support of weaponry to Kyiv during this conflict. This makes Turkey more acceptable. We have seen this happen already in spite of the fact that Moscow is aware that Ankara backs Kyiv militarily. Someone just has to mediate, and it is always easy to get the best option where there is the will to talk. For negotiations to take place, the party approaching a potential mediator must make sure that the opposing belligerent party will accept him. And this is nothing but fact, which leads us to the next part of the Swiss-led process, mediating the Amazonian crisis, playing Yaoundé's game, which we'll bring to you tomorrow in our next editorial. And I'm sure we've all observed the Yaoundé's game in the Swiss-led process already. We'll dive into that tomorrow, but for now, we've come to the end of this part of Diplomacy Masterclass Made Simple, and also the end of our editorial for today. If you want more of such interesting articles, kindly visit our website at www.abcambertv.com. For more, subscribe, become a club member and a part of this winning strategy. Find our payment details on your screen. I am Star Smart, reporting for Undaunted ABC Amber TV.